The entire movie takes place in New York City, except for a brief trip near the end to near Baltimore, Maryland. Melvin Udall, played by Jack Nicholson, is the main character of the story, who is a wealthy, intelligent, but cantankerous and prejudiced writer. He also struggles with obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, which often manifests in his daily routines. Despite his personal quirks, Melvin finds contentment within the confines of his apartment, where he devotes most of his time to writing books. Remarkably, Melvin's literary works have gained widespread acclaim, and as the story unfolds, it becomes clear why they are so popular. Currently, he is hard at work on his 66th book. Melvin's peaceful routine is disrupted by the presence of Verdell, a little terrier owned by his neighbor, Simon Bishop, played by Greg Kinnear, who happens to be an artistic painter residing on the same floor. Simon is openly gay and tends to be passive in his demeanor. Melvin also becomes acquainted with Simon's close friend, Frank Sachs, played by Cuba Gooding Jr., a black man who is quite assertive. After escaping from Simon's apartment, Verdell scampers around the hallway, much to Melvin's annoyance. Melvin attempts to soothe the little terrier, but Verdell remains out of his reach, aggravating Melvin even more by attempting to relieve himself on the wall. In frustration, Melvin seizes Verdell and shoves him down the laundry chute. However, just as Melvin is returning to his apartment, Simon emerges from his own and inquires about his beloved dog. Focused solely on getting back to his uninterrupted routine, Melvin fibs and claims to have no knowledge of Verdell's whereabouts. Simon is suspicious, but has to leave to answer an urgent phone call. He is having an exhibition of his paintings that evening, and has to see to final arrangements. Melvin naturally disappears into his apartment. During Simon's art exhibition that evening, a friend surprises him by bringing Verdell along. Simon is ecstatic to be reunited with his beloved pet, and the scene is filled with unbridled joy as the little terrier jumps around and licks Simon's face. Simon is so elated that he allows Verdell to keep licking his face. Simon eagerly asks his friend where he found Verdell, and to his dismay, the answer is less than ideal. The friend explains that he discovered Verdell in a dumpster, indulging in the unsavory habit of eating baby diapers soiled with excrement. Frank realizes what happened, and confronts Melvin about Verdell, verbally abusing him, but saying he won't tell Simon and that Melvin owes him one. Melvin begins his day by embarking on his customary breakfast ritual. He makes his way to a nearby cafe, where he claims a specific table as his own, and if others are occupying it, he resorts to insulting them until they vacate the spot. Melvin also insists on being served by a particular waitress, Carol Connolly, played by Helen Hunt. For Melvin, Carol is a crucial component of his routine, much like the designated table and cafe. Another part of his ritual involves bringing his own plastic utensils, as is typical of his obsessive-compulsive behavior. Melvin proceeds with his daily routines, content in his familiar pattern. However, one morning, Carol fails to show up to serve his breakfast, causing Melvin to become extremely distressed. He reacts in a typical OCD fashion, insulting the substitute waitress and demanding that the manager locate Carol. Unfortunately, his behavior leads to him being ejected from the cafe. As he departs, Melvin resorts to bribing a busboy to obtain Carol's last name, which he uses to track down her place of residence. Melvin endeavors to restore his customary morning routine, so he pays a visit to Carol's apartment, much to her surprise. Melvin demands that Carol return to the cafe and serve him breakfast, but she explains that she cannot comply. Her son, Spencer, played by Jesse James, is struggling with severe lung congestion, which has left him struggling to breathe. As Melvin lingers, Spencer's condition deteriorates, prompting Carol to rush him to the hospital once again. Melvin hitches a ride in the cab with them, sitting in the front seat. Melvin takes it upon himself to restore normalcy to his routine, and in doing so, he contacts his editor, whose husband, Martin Betts, played by Harold Ramis, happens to be a medical doctor. Melvin convinces the editor that Martin should examine Spencer. As Melvin is leaving the office, the secretary, who is a fan of his work, presses him to reveal his secret to connecting with women. Melvin responds by saying, "I think of a man and then I take away reason and accountability," before walking out, leaving the secretary in a state of shock. Upon arriving home, Carol is surprised to see a car with MD license plates parked outside her apartment. Fearing the worst for Spencer, She rushes inside, only to find her mother and Spencer chatting amiably with Dr. Betts. Dr. Betts inquires about the tests performed on Spencer and learns that only a minimal amount of emergency room tests have been conducted. He orders additional tests and instructs the lab to provide results later that day. When someone incredulously questions the feasibility of this timeline, Dr. Betts confidently assures them that it will happen. While he cannot yet determine what is causing Spencer's illness, he guarantees that Spencer will begin feeling much better soon. He hands Carol his business card, which includes his personal phone number, and encourages her to call him if she has any questions or concerns. Carol is overcome with emotion, expressing gratitude for Dr. Betts' assistance and promising to pay him back for his services. However, to her shock, Dr. Betts reveals that Melvin will be covering all the costs. That evening, Carol struggles to sleep and ultimately decides to visit Melvin at his apartment. She exits her apartment in a t-shirt, pants, and shoes, boards a bus, and heads to Melvin's building. As she waits at his door, a heavy rain begins to pour. At the last moment, Carol realizes that her white t-shirt has become see-through in the rain. Melvin answers the door, and Carol quickly attempts to adjust her t-shirt to retain some semblance of modesty. She confesses that she knows why Melvin has been spending money on her son, but insists that his actions will not lead to any kind of sexual relationship between them. Melvin is flabbergasted. Carol leaves. In the meantime, Frank has enlisted a young man from a local gang to serve as a model for Simon's artwork. The young man assumes he will be posing nude and begins to undress, but Simon halts him. After trying out various poses, Simon finds one he likes and begins to sketch him. They soon establish a regular routine, with the young man visiting Simon to pose for his artwork, always fully clothed. After several weeks, while Simon is in the middle of painting a portrait of the young man, members of the young man's gang break into the apartment and start stealing items. Verdell alerts Simon to their presence, and he confronts the intruders. Unfortunately, the gang members savagely assault Simon, using objects such as a table lamp to inflict serious harm upon him. Simon winds up in the hospital. He is severely injured. Frank has to find a dog sitter for Verdell, so he tries the neighbors. Finally, Frank remembers that Melvin owes him one and persuades Melvin to take Verdell. Unexpectedly, Verdell grows fond of Melvin, who reciprocates by offering the little dog bacon and other indulgences. As Melvin strolls around the neighborhood, he takes great care to avoid stepping on any cracks in the pavement. Over time, Verdell begins mimicking Melvin's behavior, purposefully hopping over the cracks as well. Melvin is overjoyed at this development, and the two establish a cozy routine. While Melvin works on his computer, Verdell lounges on a cushion nearby, and the pair head out for breakfast together. The routine proves so comfortable that Melvin quickly completes his 66th book. After a few weeks, Simon comes home from the hospital and insists on taking Verdell back. Melvin is heartbroken, but is cheered up when Simon asks Melvin to take Verdell for a daily walk. Simon discovers that he does not have medical insurance and has exhausted his funds on hospital bills. To compound his woes, his art exhibition proves to be a failure, leaving him without any source of income. Simon is unable to motivate himself to return to work and falls into a deep depression. He attempts to obtain a loan from a list of friends, but each one turns him down. As a last-ditch effort, Simon reaches out to his estranged parents for financial assistance, but they never answer his calls, living far away near Baltimore. Frank approaches Melvin, asking Melvin to drive Simon to Baltimore. Melvin resists, but eventually succumbs. Frank offers his convertible for the drive. Melvin feels too uneasy to embark on the trip alone, so he employs his leverage over Carol by insisting that since he helped her son, she should help him. Carol reluctantly agrees to accompany Melvin on the trip, with separate rooms. The trio sets out on their journey and eventually arrives at their hotel near Baltimore late in the evening, where they check into a spacious 3-bedroom suite. Carol phones home and learns that Spencer has played in his first soccer game, scoring his first goal in the process. Ecstatic over the news, Carol attempts to coax Simon into joining her to celebrate, but he firmly declines. Consequently, Carol turns to Melvin and declares him her date for the occasion. While Melvin takes a shower, Carol quickly gets dressed in a red dress with small white polka dots. Carol waits for Melvin to get out of the shower. After a long time, Melvin finishes. The trio finds themselves at a fancy restaurant, but Melvin is informed by the maitre d' that a coat and tie are required. Despite being offered a borrowed suit, Melvin remains hesitant. Carol interjects, asking if the items are dry cleaned after each use, but the maitre d' admits that they are not. In response, he hurries to a nearby tailor to purchase a suit coat and tie for Melvin. As they settle into their seats, Melvin expresses irritation over having to dress up while Carol is allowed to wear an ordinary house dress. This comment offends Carol, and she demands that Melvin compliment her or else she will leave. Eventually, Melvin admits that Carol inspires him to become a better man when he is around her, causing her to feel flattered. She moves closer to him, well within kissing distance, and inquires as to why he insisted she join them on the trip. After some hesitation, Melvin confesses that he had hoped she would engage in sexual activity with Simon. Carol is enraged by this revelation and promptly leaves the restaurant, abandoning Melvin. Carol returns to the hotel and enters Simon's room, which boasts a spacious bathtub. Despite Simon's presence, Carol declares her intention to take a bath. She draws the water, disrobes out of sight, and emerges wrapped in a towel. She takes a seat on the edge of the bathtub, with her back facing Simon. While putting her hair up, Carol strikes a pose that Simon finds mesmerizing. He urges her to hold the pose and, after some hesitation, Carol loosens up and drops her towel slightly, revealing most of her bare back. Later that evening, Melvin returns to the suite only to discover Carol lying naked on the bed while Simon sketches her intently. Filled with jealousy, Melvin confronts Carol, asking if she had slept with Simon. Carol assures him that nothing of the sort happened and explains that Simon simply held her, which she found more satisfying than sex. With his artistic passion reignited, Simon overcomes his depression and manages to reconnect with his parents over the phone. Although he may lose his apartment, Simon feels capable of coping with whatever may come his way. Upon their return to New York, Simon discovers that he has been evicted from his apartment while he was away. Unbeknownst to him, Melvin had arranged for Simon's belongings to be moved into his own spare bedroom. Simon is taken aback by both the generous offer and the remarkable condition of the room. Determined to help his friends, Simon encourages Melvin to pursue a relationship with Carol. Melvin awkwardly approaches Carol at her apartment, but she resists, insisting that all she wants is a normal boyfriend. Carol's mother, who has been eavesdropping, interjects, stating that everyone desires a normal relationship but they are a rarity. Carol begins to reconsider, and Melvin is persistent in his pursuit of her, even going so far as to step on cracks for her sake.